welcome to another Britain's Best B-Road, where one of these days we will get out on a road trip, but it's not going to be today. The little MR2 is away getting some welding done, and the 944 I think could do with a little bit of fettling. Hasn't really been run over the winter, but we'll save that for another episode. Today I thought I would share with you some of the tools that I couldn't live without now. As I've been doing more work on the two cars over the last few months and having some success, I've actually been able to do a lot of the jobs I set out to do without really breaking too much, which is a contrast to years in the past where I would do work and not be able to do things. And the reason is because of some of the tools that I have now. So I thought I would share with you what are the top 10 tools I think you need to have in your garage if you're working on an older car. Now, I'm already taking for granted that you have the basic tools to work on any car. And in this very quick episode, I just want to share with you the probably slightly more obscure tools that I use quite regularly, and without them I would not be able to do a lot of the jobs on the cars that I do. So let's crack off. Let's not crack off. Let's crack on. Number 10. So the first one, and these are in no particular order, is heat. In an old car you're dealing with rusted bolts, rounded bolts, and a lot of the time you need heat to break that seal between the thread of the bolt or the screw, whatever it is you're trying to get off, and you need heat to do that. Heating and cooling, heating and cooling, heating and cooling. Now, if all you have is effectively a plumber's torch, which I think is mainly butane that runs in that, that's better than nothing. But usually that won't get the component or the bolt hot enough. It really needs to be glowing. So I found this little thing, which is akin to a mini oxyacetylene setup. I don't have a big garage here, so I don't really want the big bulky oxyacetylene canisters kicking about the place. I don't use the heat that often. But when I do, I really need it. I've typically exhausted every other tool if I'm having to use this. This, I think, is actually for modelling. I don't know what models you would actually use this for. One canister is a mix of butane, propylene and propane, which in itself I think would burn hotter than your typical plumber's torch. And the other canister is oxygen, and the reason that's good is because you can control the amount of oxygen you put into the mix and get it burning really, really quite hot. Yeah. So you can really throttle it down. That's basically just the gas, or you can get it so it's burning really quite hot. So yeah, I'll put a link to this below because you probably won't find this on most car tool sites. But the number of times, like all the brake calipers, the bleeder screws, bleed nipples on the MR2, had to use this to get it off. I'd exhausted every other tool. So this is a very handy little thing, doesn't take up much space, doesn't cost that much either, but it has saved me a lot of times. The next one is what you do when you come across a rounded bolt or screw that you just cannot get off. You're going to have to cut it, which means an angle grinder. Help if I plugged. Help if I turned on the plug, wouldn't it? Try that again. An angle grinder. Most little kind of mini Dremel type ones can be quite good if you don't have a lot of space to get a big angle grinder in. Next one is a mini socket set. This guy here. So there's 25 different pieces in it. Easy to get it open with one hand. There we go. And the little ratchet that's in it is super well made. Really well made little thing. you have to push the end in to attach any of the stuff. It's got a little extender. You put this in and you can have torques and screws and all that sort of stuff, and it goes all the way down from, I think that's a 6mm, let's just say it's a 6mm because I can't get it out, up to 13. And the number of times I've used that, because that you can get access anywhere with that little thing, whereas you can't with most of the standard sized ratchets. And it's really, really well made, little compact thing. I absolutely love it. Wasn't very expensive, and I use it all the time. Next one is a bench vise. So this is fantastic. It's like having an extra hand to grip something, or like Iron Man's hand, I suppose, because you can grip things and exert force that you couldn't with your hands. You can get expensive bench vices, very expensive bench vices. This I think was less than £30 off Amazon, and it is really, really heavy. And the other thing you need if you've got a bench vise is to have a heavy workbench, because if this is just bolted to a flimsy, like, you know, if I bolted it onto this, for example, the first time I put any force on it, the bolts would just have ripped straight up out of that. So it has to be mounted really securely, and you need something to weigh it down against. You know, if you're pushing it this way and that way and hitting something, you know, you need to make sure that this is weighed down. And I made that just out of scraps from leftover fence posts. Just weighed it up as much as I possibly could to get the weight in it, and then I've got 3 heavy toolboxes sitting on top of it, so that is not moving anywhere. So bench vise. Next one up, I've lost count already what number we're on. Next one up is an air compressor. I'll give you some more details in the description below of what this specific one is. An air compressor, on the most part, just allows you to put attachments onto it that drive things through air compression, where normally you would just use your own strength. So an air compressor just makes life a bit easier, and sometimes it will allow you to exert more force than you would be able to by yourself. So things like I'll get air compressor attachments in here, so you know, like a gun. Actually, you need that for some jobs, such as the top nut from your shock absorber. If you need to get shocks out or springs, you need to shock it with that, so you kind of do need that. Tyre pressure gauges, air blowers. So I find this is really useful if you've got a car with a sunroof on it, and you can get the air compressor and blow air down the drain channels from a sunroof. And one of the tools that attaches to the air compressor, which is our next one, is a pneumatic vacuum brake bleeder. This is a new toy I just got for the MR2, and having spent, well, all brakes I've ever bled, you're just putting a hose, a bit of tube over the brake bleeder, putting it into a bucket, a small bucket of brake fluid, and pumping the brakes manually. This is much more effective, saves you so much time. You can do it with just one person. Sometimes you need to get somebody to sit in the car and pump the brakes for you. This just does it all. So you connect that to your air hose at this end, put that onto the bleeder screw, bleed nipple, and you just pull the handle and it bleeds it. Next one, torque wrench. So most bolts and screws and nuts and all that stuff on a car have to be tightened to a specific torque for a reason. If you under torque them, if they're not tight enough, there's a risk that they're going to either there's going to be play. If it's in the steering system, you're going to get play in it. It's going to feel horrible. It might start to unscrew, so it's very dangerous. The thing could fall apart. Or you could over tighten it and shear the head off the bolt, which would obviously be quite bad as well. So if there's a torque setting for whatever bolt or nut you're putting back on, then you need a torque wrench to make sure you put it to the right setting. The last of the tools that I want to show you, I think I couldn't live without, I definitely couldn't live without these locking grips. The number of times where you come across a rounded bolt or screw and you have to grip it by the head and turn it. I'm actually missing one, there should be a third one. It has disappeared over the years. I've had these for years and years and years, and you're probably into at least the hundreds of screws or bolts that these have unscrewed when the socket or spanner or screwdriver couldn't do it. This is not a tool, but rather to organise your tools. And I've only just sort of recently tidied up everything. It might still not look to you that it's particularly tidy, but now I know where everything is. Now, if you've watched some pictures from the past, you would have seen that there was tyres down the middle between the two cars, and just didn't give me room to work. And there were some times where I would be looking for a tool for half an hour that I knew I had somewhere but just couldn't quite find, and then once I found it I could do the job in 2 minutes. And it's just so frustrating. So organise your tools, know where everything is. The last thing I wanted to mention, and it's not a tool, is safety when you're working. I recommend you wear gloves, this the disposable ones. A lot of harmful chemicals that you might be working with in the garage, and even if you're not, just working on an old car, getting your hands really oily and mucky, if you're having to scrub them clean all the time, it's not particularly good for your skin, scrubbing all that muck off all the time. So, gloves, safety goggles, particularly if you're working under the car where something might fall onto or into your eyes. You do not want to be getting brake fluid in your eyes or rust particles in your eyes, and I say that from experience. And a mask as well, particularly if you're under the car, if you're scrubbing rust off and dust, a lot of particles that you really don't want to be breathing in. The other thing, if you're working on your own in the garage, as I do most of the time, then it's just a good precaution to have your mobile phone fully charged and on you somewhere you can reach, and let somebody know that you're out working in the garage and roughly when to expect you to be back in, so that if you don't appear, they can just check on you. Usually in my case it's because I've made a mess of something and the job's taken me a lot longer than I thought it would, but it's just a good safety thing to have somebody check on you. And the last thing from a safety point of view is to have a fire extinguisher in your garage. A lot of flammable chemicals and fluids in a garage, and there can be some trigger points for heat, whether it's the air compressor heating up or the burner that we showed earlier, or even the car if it's been running, engine and exhaust components heating up. You can quite easily catch on fire, so good idea to have a fire extinguisher. And also, if you've never used a fire extinguisher, I would recommend that you get a little cheap one, £10–15 you can get them for, just so you know how to break that safety seal on it, and also so you know how little time you will probably have to disperse the contents of that fire extinguisher. You might think it'll last longer than it actually does. You really need to get into the heart of the fire very quickly with a fire extinguisher if you can. That's it. That's all the tools that I couldn't live without to do the jobs that I do on the cars in the garage. But let me know what tools you use. What tools could you not live without, and what do you recommend? Thanks very much for watching. Hope you liked it. Please like if you have and subscribe. More videos coming along shortly. See you next time. Bye bye.